Hello again, and welcome everyone to the opening plenary of the Talwars Network Leaders Conference. We are honored to be joined today by Dr. Philippe Cotton. But before I formally introduce Phil, just a note about the agenda for this plenary. Immediately following Phil's remarks, we will be joined for a roundtable discussion by Dana Cunningham, the Pierre and Pamela Omidyar Dean of the Tisch College of Civic Life at Tufts University, and also by some students from the Next Generation Leaders Pandemic Recovery and Resilience Group. Thank you to all of them for their time and, most importantly, for their commitment to this work. And now it's my distinct pleasure to introduce Dr. Phil Cotton. Phil is the Director of Human Capital Development at the MasterCard Foundation. He also heads the Foundation's Scholars Program, an important initiative dedicated to developing Africa's next generation of transformation leaders, actually the largest of its kind. The MasterCard Foundation Scholars Program allows students whose talent and promise exceed their financial resources to complete their education while investing in their leadership potential. With a vision that we all share, that education is a catalyst for social and economic change, the program focuses on developing leaders who seek systemic impact, encouraging them to be active contributors in their communities. Phil, who is a citizen of both the UK and Rwanda, previously provided leadership at the University of Rwanda, first as principal of the College of Medicine and Health Sciences, and then as its vice chancellor. Prior to this, he practiced family medicine and was professor of teaching and learning with a responsibility for student welfare at his alma mater, the University of Glasgow. Phil holds several honorary professorships. He also chairs the board of Rwanda Biomedical Center. He's a Methodist preacher, founded the Fair Trade Organization in Scotland, and is a trustee and advisor to several small charities. In 2017, he was named Officer of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire, OBE, in the Queen's Birthday Honours. And in 2018, he received the gold medal from the Association for the Study of Medical Education for his outstanding contributions. But above all, Phil is a strong believer in the power of compassion in the transformation of young people. Phil, thank you for sharing your time and your life with us here today. So without further ado, Dr. Philippe Cotton.
Thank you very much, President Segovia. Thank you to you and to everybody for this special privilege of addressing this forum today. And I bring greetings from the MasterCard Foundation, and I offer you congratulations on convening another remarkable and important gathering despite the ongoing pandemic. And as we were talking before we came on air today, I look forward to meeting with groups of students and scholars that are getting involved in today's forum. To all of our distinguished guests, it's an honor to be among you. And like you, I'm looking forward to the rich exchanges that lie ahead. I've had the good fortune in my life of working across several sectors, from medicine to education and now in philanthropy. And today I have the privilege of leading the MasterCard Foundation Scholars Program. As President Segovia says, it's the largest initiative of its kind dedicated to developing Africa's next generation of leaders. And we've committed over 40,000 scholarships today and witnessed the incredible and indelible transformative impact that a small group of thoughtful, committed, and empowered young people can have on their communities. And it's become even clearer. It's become even clearer in these last few years, where we've seen young people leading movements to advance equity, to expand inclusion, to promote sustainability, and secure freedom from violence. So no matter where I go, or what I do, or who I meet, there are few things that are more invigorating, more challenging, and more inspiring than listening to young people. Their voices, their views, and their vision matters more than ever. When I was appointed as university president, I was given one piece of advice, and it went like this. If you really want to know what's happening in the university, don't ask your staff, but go and sit with your students. And of course, if you really want to know what's happening in your local communities, don't ask somebody who lives outside the community, but go and sit in your community, go and walk through your community. I recall taking over 100 senior academics to lunch in the student canteen. And after lunch, when I asked my colleagues what the food was like, the professor of anesthesia stood up and said, "Today, we've tasted humility." If it's important, and I leave it to you to decide, universities have to find ways of expressing humility. A few years ago, our president and CEO, Rita Roy, addressed this very forum, and she challenged us to consider why institutions of higher learning exist. And she argued that our shared role as educators is simple: to enable transformation, and in large part by developing transformative leaders. In the foundation, we've learned from working with so many leaders in our staff, the young entrepreneurs we invest in, the Indigenous youth in Canada, the scholars in Africa, and in university leaders in South Africa, Ghana, Uganda, Ethiopia, Lebanon, and in Costa Rica, and many other places. We realized that in order to drive the kind of impact that we envisioned, we too had to evolve. So over the last few years, we've transitioned to a new operating model, establishing offices across Africa, recruiting staff, and committing to ensuring that 75% of our partnerships are with African organizations, a goal which we've been successful at meeting, not so much because of who we are, but because of the abundance of forward thinking and committed innovators, entrepreneurs, and change makers in the continent. These changes matter. They brought us closer to communities. They've enabled multiple kinds of proximity. They've ensured that our foundation more closely resembles the communities that we serve. But these changes didn't happen overnight. They took intentionality. If it's important, and I leave it to you to decide, universities have to find ways to express transformation, for they have to be transformed in order to transform others. Leaders that disrupt and challenge the status quo, leaders with courage, leaders of integrity and authenticity, leaders who can relate to the very problems they are trying to solve. And we face many urgent global challenges: worsening poverty, enduring inequality, declining trust in institutions, seemingly intractable violence, and perennial marginalization. Perhaps all of these issues could be summed up in one overarching word from the Nigerian literary giant Chinua Achebe, who would sum up all of these problems as simply and squarely a failure of leadership. If it's important, and I leave it to you to decide, universities have to find ways to allow students to express the needs of the world. Transformative leadership is a unit of our work in the Scholars Program, led by one wonderful young woman called Dua. We're focusing on transformative and sometimes transformational living. This puts a huge burden on the shoulders of the next generation of leaders in our communities, but we stand with you as you take that burden of responsibility. Universities have to model not only transformational policies, processes, and living, but equip students to bear the burdens of the world and its people. To do so is a privilege, and with this privilege comes sacrifice. Sacrifice that may be about rethinking our insistence on league tables, and with sacrifice comes privilege. The privilege of service in the name of our communities. If it's important, and I leave it to you to decide, universities have to find ways to express privilege and sacrifice, and to share the burden. In the foundation, we listen to one another, to our partners, and to the young people that we serve. In recent years, we've launched a digital diaries initiative and a large youth voices initiative. And so our big bet on a bright future for the continent of Africa is the young people of this world and their agency and their voices. And we stand with many organizations and certainly universities in our belief in the potential of young people to lead, to transform, and to thrive. If it's important, and I leave it to you to decide, universities have to find ways to nurture students to express their potential, their exponential and their exceptional potential. The Talwar network has so much power that it's frightening to contemplate the magnitude of change that can come from it. There are two great examples of networks and working together that I want to bring to you. The first is Ashesi University, a partner of ours for 9 years. And over the last 3 years, they've been implementing an education collaborative, convening leaders from 25 universities across Africa. This network of institutions aims to share meaningful insights, stimulate collaboration, and empower education stakeholders in Africa to transform the continent, and is collaborating on a range of issues from pedagogy to education management. The Ashesi-led initiative is to welcome an additional 75 universities to their fold. That's the power of networks. The second example comes from an e-learning initiative that we've embarked on alongside the United States International University in Africa and Arizona State University, a program that is designed to strengthen the capability of African universities to deliver learning remotely and inclusively. Both of these partnerships are designed not only to foster collaboration, but also to advance knowledge transfer that critically strengthens institutions of learning in Africa. The Talwar network will work with others to drive change in education systems through a sisterhood of programs, some that reach out to communities that we find our identity in, and other programs and initiatives that reach in, deep into the soul of our organizations, always expressing compassion. If it's important, and I leave it to you to decide, universities have to constantly find ways to express compassion. Listen to the young people. They are telling us what is wrong with our systems, and work with them to drive change. One great example of this is the Regional Universities Forum for Capacity Building in Agriculture, or RUForum, a network of higher education institutions in Africa dedicated to developing leaders who will transform Africa's agriculture sector. They do this in part by developing innovative projects that connect students directly to the issues facing smallholder farmers, encouraging them to understand and innovate around these issues, and teaching them to listen to the individuals on the front line of that sector. Another example is the MasterCard Foundation Earth University Fellowship Program, a program that we co-designed to accelerate the capacity of scholars to lead social, environmental, and economic transformation. It offers postgraduate community-based fellowships for young people in agriculture, connecting them to host organizations engaged in transformative work. In closing, let me just draw you in for a moment. It is possible that the more you become the kind of university that matters to our young people, because you connect with our economies and the poorest and the most hard to reach, and those most harshly oppressed by climate change, then the more serving you become, the more humane you become, and the more engaged you become, and the more compassionate you become. Listen to the young people. They are telling us what is wrong with our systems, and the solutions are in their hands. Thank you all for everything that you do, and I remain privileged to spend this time with you. I wish you well. Thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to our global audience. I am Dana Cunningham, the Dean of the Tisch College of Civic Life at Tufts, and it is my honor and my privilege to support this student panel with our amazing next generation leaders. Many thanks to Dr. Cotton for his really inspiring words about urging universities to express privilege and sacrifice, shared burden, and most important, transformation. And on transformation, of course, our student leaders are our leaders. And so they've brought together this extraordinary panel with their insights, with their really challenging questions, with their messages from the future that actually right now they are building and living within. So with that, I turn it over to our leaders.
Thank you so much, Dana Cunningham. A warm welcome to fellow Talos Network universities, university leaders, students, the MasterCard Foundation, policymakers, and fellow colleagues. It is our extreme honor and privilege that we present to you today. Our cohort of next generation leaders falls under the topic of pandemic recovery and resilience. But more than a topic, this concept has shaped our thinking and aspirations over the past 6 months. And we hope that after our presentation is concluded, conversations will be had and changes implemented to ensure that we are better prepared for the future. Next slide, please. Envision this for a moment. Think back to when you were 4 years old. Now think about your favorite shirt. Now think about when you were 16. Would that shirt still fit you? Perhaps it will pop over your head. Perhaps it will look like a crop top. What did we do then? We adapted to change. We sought solutions of that time and we hoped for something better. Through this analogy, I've hoped to create the idea that just like the shirt we once loved, our approach to understanding tertiary institutions in pandemic recovery and resilience is not a one-size-fits-all. In other words, there isn't one solution. What works for my university, Stellenbosch, may not work for Ashesi University in Ghana, but that didn't stop us from formulating a vision of best practices that one could pick from and mold to fit their context. Next slide, please. Our presentation seeks to evoke critical thinking, emotion, drive for change, and questions. This process will be explored through answering 3 critical questions, namely the purpose and existing challenges of tertiary education pre-COVID, education in health crisis, and lastly, in reimagining university in a post-COVID world. Leaders from all over the world, it was mentioned earlier today, but COVID presents many challenges. But what is important that we do not revert back to normalcy, but allow the challenges that we experienced to guide us in working towards understanding the lessons of COVID. As was mentioned, allow it not to be in vain. How can we ensure that those lives that were taken too soon and the psychological distresses and adversities that were created are not left in vain? Let's make it count. Next slide, please. Allow me to introduce myself. I am Mark Nathanson, Group Lead for the Pandemic Recovery Cohort. I'm a third-year medical student at Stellenbosch University and take great interest in medical research and education. Here is a team of brilliant minds.
On my part, I am Clement Gosan from Cameroon, a MasterCard Foundation scholar at Tisch University, and I'm also recently been named a top 50 global finalist for the Global Student Prize. I am also passionate about youth development issues and social entrepreneurship as I work towards inspiring and empowering students in my community with the skills and resources needed to create change. I believe in Africa we need people who are willing and capable to create change in their communities. In my spare time, I love graphic designing, videography, photography, and soccer.
Thank you, everyone. I'm Patrick Oyanga, MSc Research Methodology student at Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology, Nairobi, Kenya. I'm passionate about community services and co-development. I'm also CEO and founder of Community Minds Research and Community Resource Initiative, where we handle the areas of employability, especially among the youth, fresh graduates, and related. I have interest in research theory, employability to the research, and social entrepreneurship. Thank you.
I am Daviddinitang from Rwanda. I'm a recent bachelor graduate of University of Rwanda in option of agriculture economics. I'm an ambitious servant community leaders and youth change maker. I'm with passion of socio-economic protection and environmental resilience. So far, I'm project monitoring and evaluation consultant by profession.
Hello, everyone. I'm Muhamad and I'm from India. I'm currently a final year law student at OP Jindal Global University, where I run the Legal Aid Clinic and the Investor Protection Cell. I'm also the founder of Project Kushal Society, a registered NGO, where we are trying to integrate skills with education and are working towards inclusion of sexual minorities in the society. Our organization has organized one of the leading events of India, including Punjab's first Pride Parade, one of India's first online Pride parties, and hundreds of workshops for students.
Hello, everyone. My name is Muchadi. I'm a fourth year medical student from the University of Cape Town in South Africa, and I'm passionate about accessible healthcare for all. I'm passionate about youth development and changing the world one idea at a time.
Hello, everyone. I'm kozi. I'm from Afghanistan. Currently, I'm living in Spain, where I'm studying double degree in criminology and law. I'm interested in international law and civic engagement. This also, I'm enjoying participating in drawing and sports. And what I mostly like to do is share experience and get experience from other students. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Promise Yalungo. I am from the University of Venda in Thohoyandou, Limpopo, South Africa. I am passionate about shining the spotlight on rural and township creatives and making sure that digitally they are also included in the growing global creative industry. I thank you.
It now gives me immense pleasure to welcome our esteemed facilitator, Dana Cunningham, the founder and executive director of Community Innovative Lab, CoLab at MIT and current dean of Jonathan M. Tisch College of Civic Life. Dana, may I kindly request if you could please ask the questions as presented on screen. Thank you.
I will follow closely the instructions of my leaders. So the first question, what was the university like in a pre-COVID era?
So I'll go first. Thank you so much, Professor Cunningham. I feel university students come from different socioeconomic backgrounds with their specific privileges and exclusions. And the physical university spaces brought a sense of equity, where we were not drawn back by concerns like internet issues, lack of electricity, and domestic pressures. Instead, we could sit in a classroom like almost equals and enjoy learning in its truest sense, especially in India, where we have a robust and universal affirmation action policy related to education, which ensured that students, at least some students, regardless of their social backgrounds, could reach a place like university, which was the only place where they had access to internet and perhaps education. Now that affirmation action policy has become more and more hollow. Another thing that I am sure all of us will agree, that interactions in the university with other students and even professors were never just professional. Instead, they were personal in nature, where friendships, mentor-mentee relationships, and strong support networks were easily created, which are sincerely desirable in current times. The concern was never just to log on to classes. Instead, we could take part in a variety of activities and the everyday life of students, was much more enriching. If you could see the images, you will observe how after class I could go and play football, sit and read in the wonderful, beautiful library, and partake in different extracurricular activities and explore my passion for community engagement through societies like the Legal Aid Clinic.
Thank you so much, Muhak. To answer the question further, I'd like us to take a trip down memory lane to reminisce on university life pre-COVID. On the 6th of March, 2017, I sat in my first university lecture class, an in-person class, with 240 students and a lecturer at the front, and we vigorously took notes as the lecturer spoke. And that's how the rest of the year would be, together with practical lab sessions, anatomy dissections, and group tutorials. As a medical student, this meant interacting with patients at the clinical bedside and assisting with practical procedures in the hospital. As a UCT student, we all looked forward to the highly anticipated Plaza Week, where all the different societies and clubs on campus advertised their societies and wanted us to be part of all of them, honestly. I remember attending events hosted by different societies, networking and socializing with people from diverse cultures. But apart from academics, this also meant attending residence parties, watching sports games, but nothing says university quite like running from one bus stop to the next, rushing to submit your assignment in person at 11:59 when the due date is at 12 o'clock. That's pre-COVID university. Next slide, please.
Thank you, everyone. I'm happy to present you something about why our university is not prepared. This is a good question, of course, across the board. But for example, I'll use my context of Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology. We're looking at issues of how prepared can we be for in case of emergencies. Of course, the COVID-19 pandemic came in. Just caught everyone, I think, unawares. All of a sudden, hearing from March 2020 in Kenya, we had just used to hear about China. There is COVID-19 in China, and we're wondering which kind of disease it is. But at least we hoped that China is far from Kenya. We shall not be able to be affected, or we shall not get here. Little do we know that it will be here. Away from that, we just hoped that, of course, we have developed countries. We have across the globe, we have the organizations like World Health Organization. I know they can be able to handle this. They can be able to stop this. But how comes it went out of their hands and reached almost every country across the globe? Now, the question now remains, why were universities not prepared? Of course, one of the things we are looking at when we discussed in the past, we're talking about looking at a traditional classroom. We're talking about people only knew that in our university, we only get to the classroom and meet our professors. We discuss whatever the professors have as we take notes. We never assumed or engaged a situation where we can be virtually online or study because of a certain scenario that prevents us from doing that. Number two, we are looking at things like there's been resistance, especially where I've come from. There are some, of course, some local universities, and even not just universities, but the people, where they feel, I remember very well, before COVID, people were feeling virtual degrees are not even degrees because they still believe that a university is going to the classroom. With the pandemic here, they have seen that actually a university can be away from the classroom. We're talking about the provision of facility, ICT facility. We're talking about assuming that we wanted to have this COVID, to adapt in the context of COVID, we would be talking about having ICT resources in place so that we turn the university into virtual learning. But how many universities had this? Apparently in Kenya, for example, where I come from, and the experience I've had, very few are prepared in this. Another point I'm looking at, we're looking at things like the uniqueness of the pandemic. While we have had such scenarios of pandemic before, we heard about, like, for example, Ebola. It was only contained in West Africa, spreading slowly to Central Africa and almost to East Africa. It never went across the board the way COVID-19 has. So everyone across the globe was wondering, we cannot have a pandemic. We were so doubtful that you cannot have a pandemic hitting the entire world. Out of that, I think we can be able to summarize that universities were actually unprepared because of certain reasons. And of course, one of the things we're talking about is the ICT preparation, the uniqueness of the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you.
Okay, what is the university like within the COVID era? So this is where we are now.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. It's an honor for me to be part of this conference. I will briefly mention the role of university during the COVID-19 era. Firstly, I would like to start with the SEC institution, which is formed by 10 international schools and 2 foundations, as well as the University of Camilo José Cela, which academic institution founded in 2000 and located in Madrid, Spain, that belonged to the SEC educational group. The pandemic was an opportunity to strengthen SEC's community. The University of Camilo José Cela responded quickly and effectively by adapting its pedagogical system to the needs derived from COVID-19. On the one hand, it developed different academic and well-being initiatives. We must highly mention how students from different bachelor and postgraduate degrees become teaching assistants. To support the students of SEC schools, the various training programs developed by the University of Camilo José Cela for the SEC school teachers to deal with the new online education forum, the online psychological support and counseling service offered by the psychological department to the entire SEC community, and a 3D printing of masks for health workers in collaboration with the Department of Nursing, where I also take part, and it was a great experience. On the other hand, the University of Camilo José Cela, through its foundation, fostered education in vulnerable contexts via 2 of its programs, the SEC Vulnerable Network, which put the focus on the pandemic needs of refugees and children. At the risk of social exclusion, the teacher training platform, each teach that developed new content to support the school. Needs derived from the COVID crisis. I believe more than ever, the pandemic made explicit the need to learn from each other, to support each other, and to share the learning struggles. We were all striving to overcome. Learning was found in unexpected places, and through initiative that combined traits of different communities members, which might have otherwise remained unseen and would be probably never have been connected. Thank you, everyone.
And before, if we could just for a minute, would any of the panelists like to comment on a question we've received in the chat? Is it more likely, perhaps, post-COVID, that students will take advantage of in-person activities and opportunities and resources, maximize their in-person engagements as a result of COVID? Would anybody like to respond to that?
I can go together. I can go.
Go for it, Mark. Go for it. I'll join in. Go for it, please.
I think that is a wonderful question. And Mark, I'll just say my opinion and you can add on to that. So definitely. It is always said we value something once we lose it. We value it the most once we lose it, right? So for me personally, since I'm also a student, I'm missing going to the campus and enjoying what the benefits of the physical spaces. As I said in my part as well, the physical spaces not just provided us with opportunities, it also offered equity. It also offered so much that a lot of students lack at their own places. So all the students will definitely appreciate it, and we are dying for universities to open. And Mark, you can add on.
Thank you so much. I think you summed it up so beautifully. I think one way I can say it, which will make no sense at all to anyone, but I never knew I would miss attending an 8 a.m. lecture. And I feel like it's something we're all looking forward to. So for the sake of time, Mohak said it brilliantly.
Okay, so what has been the effect of, I think we're past that question. I think we've got that one done. Next one, please. So what has been the effect of COVID on tertiary education?
So in answering this question of the effects of COVID on tertiary education, as David alluded that most universities were not prepared for this. So I'm going to be looking at this question from the perspective of my university, which is the University of Venda, which is a rural-based university. Besides the loss of life of students and staff members, there were many diverse effects of this pandemic. If we look at the history of the University of Venda, this is a university that was formed in 1982 as a result of the Separate Universities Act of 1960, which then forced for people to form universities across tribal lines. And this excluded them from other universities, and they could only go to these universities that were under-resourced in a way. So this under-resourcing, as time developed and post the apartheid era, we still saw this university struggling with resources. So when the COVID pandemic hit, it was disastrous because we had students who didn't have gadgets. And besides having gadgets, there were students who had gadget and data allocation, but the areas that they were coming from were so rural that they didn't have network coverage. So this meant that most students had to lag behind in their studies. This meant that many students had to drop out. And there was also a problem of many staff members being unfamiliar with remote learning tools. And this meant that some of the staff members were forcing students to come and submit assignments in person. And this was very impossible looking also at the COVID restrictions that were also not allowing students to travel. But in looking at this issue that I just mentioned now, I believe that Linda Graham in this book, Resilience, mentions that this book is dedicated to practice, because dedicated practice is what recovers and strengthens our resilience. And I believe that this presentation is dedicated to that. This is dedicated to practice because we need to create more habits of responding more flexibly, because flexibility is at the core of resilience. Coming from a rural university, there was a lack of willingness for some of the staff members to be flexible in terms of the pandemic, to be flexible with remote learning tools. So I'm saying that in order for us to move and overcome this effect of COVID, there's a lot that we need to do, and we need to be flexible. And speaking of flexibility, as a group, we also understood that one of our members, David, could not join us in this presentation. And we became flexible and included an audio of his presentation, of which we will be listening to just now.
The rapid spread of coronavirus outbreak disrupted the entire life system globally. Basically, in Rwanda on 14th March 2020, the Ministry of Health has reported the country's first case of COVID-19. This has affected higher learning institutions in Rwanda since Cabinet have been officially forced the closure of university classes, secondary and primary schools. Basically, for higher learning institutions in Rwanda, their adaptive capacity to shift to digital class was very limited. As well, the quality of education have been corrupted since there is limited closer proximity to each other's and limited physical interaction of student with lecturer, and access of students to laboratories and practices is very limited.
So as we heard from that audio, David is explaining to us on how in his country, universities had to be closed down. And this was the sentiment across the globe. And he's also alluding to the fact that due to the fact that they had limited resources, it was very difficult for them to move the university to a digital space. So now I'm going to invite a colleague of ours, Clement Gosan, as we're now gonna be diving into the discussion on how could students become pandemic resilient.
Thank you, Promise. I think as we are getting ideas around how universities could restructure themselves to support students, it is also very important for students to restructure themselves to be able to adapt. As you had mentioned previously, flexibility is key. You've all also mentioned that being familiar with remote tools was one of the major problems one of the major problems that were highlighted across universities in rural areas in South Africa. And I think one of the ways that students can become more pandemic resilient or become pandemic resilient is that students should also be flexible and learn to use and learn new digital skills. For example, in my community, I noticed that although some students would have access to the resources, they had access to phones and smart gadgets and the internet connection, and they also had good spots where they could take their classes from. Some of them were not familiar with technical tools like Zoom, Google Meets, Google Classroom. So one of my recommendations for students to become more pandemic resilient is they need to take on initiatives to keep up to date with digital trends and learn how to use these digital tools, because we have seen that amidst a global pandemic, amidst a world crisis, technology can keep us together. My second recommendation, which I'm also going to throw out for our group to pick up, would be that students also need to become more self-aware. I think learning about self-awareness is something that we should strive to do, understanding ourselves and how we can better control our emotions during the pandemic. We noticed that during the crisis, we've had overwhelming times. We've had students going through an array of emotions. And if we learn how to become self-aware and how to effectively manage our emotions, we would in turn become more pandemic resilient. I'm going to call on my fellow groupmates to add points to this.
Thank you so much for that, Clement. And just to jump onto your point of students learning skills, what was interesting to watch while the pandemic unfolded was people who were working and how they were fearing, losing their jobs and, their employment status being on the line. But what was interesting was, as a student, you're watching this and saying, is my career pandemic proof? As I study this, am I actually going to be at the end of the pandemic at some point, and also questioning my employability and my employment status? But I think what's important for students to realize is when employers look at someone they want to employ, they don't just want a typical CV of I studied this. Personally, I'm a medical student, so they don't just want someone who studied medicine. But what more can you offer to that workspace? It's important that you know a bit about finance, some law, about coding, how to design an app. And even though your university doesn't offer this, there's so many platforms such as LinkedIn Learning, YouTube, Udemy that offer all these skills. And all of this was happening even before the pandemic. All this access to digital education was there before the pandemic. But if you ask yourself how many students actually enroll in these extra courses, it would actually be quite interesting to see how many do. But I think what I want to just hone on is that you need to be more than just a student that's focused on specifically what you're studying. You need to be someone who's holistic and someone who's got a great range of skills, which when an employer looks at you, they'll realize that this is a unique person, not because they studied something unique, but they have a unique set of skills, which we can't do without in the workplace or wherever you go to. Thank you.
And Muchadi, if I may just insert a question from the chat for you, which is, so this is a question from Stellenbosch, and it is, I've noticed that students aren't anxious to be back in the classroom. They're not eager to be back in the classroom. Any thoughts about why that is?
I think it's interesting because they aren't eager to be back in the physical classroom or in classroom in general. Because if it's being back in the physical classroom, I think students have realized that if I can learn the same content, but in an environment that best suits my learning, then why should I be in a lecture hall, where the lecturer is just in the front and, as I mentioned, vigorously taking notes. For example, you can be a student who works at a coffee shop because maybe that works better for you, or you want to be outside, in a garden working, just something along those lines. But I think the reason why students are anxious is because they're realizing that the way we were doing it pre-COVID doesn't have to be like that post-COVID. They're realizing that there's so many different ways in which the university can change to accommodate this currently changing digital era which we're in. So I think I wouldn't say, I personally wouldn't say they're anxious, but they're more like, they're more resilient about the type of change that we want to go to. They're eager for more change and not just repeating the same cycles over and over again.
Fantastic. And just maybe that opens up a question for the whole panel around, so then what is the role of universities? What role should they play in the post-pandemic time? So I'll just leave that open for whoever wants to address it, because it's such a perfect segue to our next question. And so the next question is, what should universities look like post-pandemic? How could university structures prevent future disruptions in education? And I think that's the open discussion, is that right? For us to just sort of have a free flow.
Yes, this is the open discussion. I would also love to hear some of your thoughts around this theme.
My thoughts?
Yeah.
Sure. Thank you for putting me on the spot, Clement. So I really want to respond to what Muchadi just said about students being empowered to select more tailored, more appropriate learning methodologies. I think that is the most important change post-COVID, that just we were forced into it and now we know. And so I think universities are going to have to come up with all kinds of accommodations and adaptations to that, including flexible curricula, online to offline, community-based curricula. Students want to be in the world. They saw how this crisis impacted communities. They want to be in the world. And so bundled degree programs, different ways of getting your certifications, different increments for education. I actually think is in the theme of not letting the pandemic be in vain. There are so many possible innovations in the structure of education. And I think students more and more will demand it because they know it's possible. And universities will have to respond.
If I may jump in at this point, I like the whole concept of, when we're discussing as a group, how we went from the purpose of a physical space and the point of a building versus the point of a virtual space. A thought that sort of came to my mind now was, and I think it's actually been a common terminology of the hybrid model, or an amalgamation of virtual and of physical space. Because one thing, for example, we had a little engagement here at the University of Pretoria, and they were speaking about how, we get a diverse amount of students, and a university should be catering as best they can to what students are. You get individuals from all over the world that come to universities, and some may prefer virtual spaces where they want to be in their own rooms, in their own spaces, and some may prefer going to have a social interaction in class. And it matters of giving that student the choice of how that would look. However, it does bring in the question of what would fees look like then? If you're in school, like varsity, in a physical space, versus if you're at home. Furthermore, it also brings in the question of what about the access to technology? What about inequality? What about a big concept of the digital divide? So I think like one way universities can look at it is an amalgamation of the two and allowing students to make a choice and work in a way out how that could look. Yeah.
And so we have a request to ask a question. And let's see, where was that? Muhammad Talha from Pakistan has a question. I think actually you're probably going to need to put it in the chat because I don't think audience participants can be given audio. Am I right about that, team?
I think Jess can work on that, on giving audio to a specific participant.
Okay, so Muhammad Talha has a question, and maybe while we're waiting for that to queue up, we'll wait to hear from Jess on that. We'll go to another set of questions. So there are two sets of questions kind of grouped together. One have to do with making sure to address students' desire to work in underprivileged, marginalized, structurally excluded communities. So how, to support, to provide leadership. So would somebody on the panel like to respond to that?
Yeah, I can take it. So, like what needs to be done, I believe what the pandemic has actually taught us is that in as much as we can have marginalized universities, at the end of the day, we have this global community that is connected now through the digital media. So I think now what we must do is work on a program for digital inclusion. And I think that the reason why even now we might have students who are not eager to go back to class is because class alone does not constitute the whole university experience. The whole university experience is about meeting friends, having extracurricular activities. And I believe that in terms of how we could restructure these elements going forward is to ensure that even in the extracurricular activities, out of class activities, we include programs that will allow for our students to learn the new skills that COVID has showed us that we need. We need more students who will have digital skills. We can have more students that will be in the digital creative economy. So we need to make sure really that we support marginalized communities using best of practices. For example, I'm a student from the University of Venda. Never in a million years would I have thought that I could be on a board with people from Harvard University, but it is happening today. And it's all thanks to the fact that someone somewhere had to think that let us reach out. So it's all about reaching out. And earlier, Max told me something to say, don't be quiet about your struggle. And I think also those who are in marginalized communities shouldn't be quiet about their struggles. They should let these well-established, well-resourced universities know what is it that they might need to restructure their programs as well, so that all in all, together, we can hold hands and collaborate.
Thank you, Promise. We have a question about how universities can attend to the mental health crises that students and their communities are facing as a result of the pandemic. Somebody like to respond to that?
I'm going to give it a go. So I think first I'll speak for the case of my university and some of the engagements that they did to support students' mental health during that period. So from my understanding is, students get some of the most of the interaction students get through universities are with their lecturers and friends. So one of the strategies that each department in my university, Ashesi University, did was to make sure that during the beginning of class, teachers get to do a little bit of checking with students, how you're feeling. This sort of sets the tone for class and also makes sure that students are also in a good mood for class. And beyond that, I recall speaking to a couple of friends and know that letting me know that university made access to counselors free of charge in some universities in the US too, where the students would typically pay for counseling services. They were made free of charge during the COVID period. And I think these are some of the ways that universities have responded to students' mental health, and also to beyond students and the community. My university also made sure that although key personnel, officers who were very key during the in-person period, during pre-COVID, people like the guard, the cleaners, the university still made sure to keep them on a budget, to keep them on a salary, even though the campus was not being catered for. But I think, this went a long way to show how supportive the community would be. In terms of resources, Ashesi also sort of provided access to technology by learning out computers from our lab, and also providing some stipend for internet to students who were facing technical difficulties. So as the analogy in our beginning, one size cannot fit all, right? These are the solutions that sort of work for our community and have been effective, but we cannot suggest solutions that would also work for your community, right? Because the solutions that could work for my community would maybe be smaller or would not be up to the solutions that could work for your community. But I'm going to keep it open for some of my mates to take on that question too.
Thank you so much, Clement. Definitely, I would say mental health is a passion of many of us. To just add a thought, I think one thing in terms of mental health is that universities, I feel, have to acknowledge that it is a problem. The reason I've taken such a maybe controversial approach to it is, I am like Phil mentioned, Dr. Cotton mentioned earlier, if you want to understand what students are going through, sit with the students. And I often find myself sitting around other students and they're speaking about, I do not have access to this. There's a 3-month waiting list to see a psychologist. There's no psychiatrist on campus. Yet campus will potentially have the story of, but we do have this, we do have this, we do have this. Maybe it's a matter of like indicating to us, but I believe having that conversation that yes, mental health in university is a problem. Now, how can we deal with it without saying, here's a card, go get help, but rather, listen, we don't have a structure. What can we do better? Yeah, we can on to the next person.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Mark, that like universities need to be more cognizant of, the role they play in students' mental health. Because what's also been happening at UCT specifically and amongst other universities is that students feel that the university adds more pressure, which also like creates the cycle of students' mental health deteriorating. And although they do provide the support, it's like there's another 3-month waiting list and all of that. So I think how students could be more cognizant of how they play a role is, you can't expect that the same amount of work that was done pre-COVID would be the same when it's on an online environment. For example, if in a year you would have to go through 72 lectures, for example, obviously in a digital space, that means that someone has to teach themselves, go over the work more slowly. And also if they don't have access to a lot of digital aids, this could impair the entire process. So it's about being flexible and saying, okay, instead of doing 72 lectures this year, maybe it would be beneficial if we decrease it to 50. Instead of having 5 exams, maybe we should have 3. And I think in that way, universities will play a direct role in students' mental health by understanding that the requirements aren't the same as before when we went on a digital platform.
Mohak, did you want to also respond to this question?
Yeah. What I wanted to say, Mutlari very well presented it. I think it's not just the expectations, but the curriculum in itself. What the universities keep on doing is they are channelizing the same expectations, same curriculum, and same everything that was pre-COVID. They're trying to impose that during the COVID scenario. But we need to understand the students are not the same. They're not at the same level. The equity is not present anymore. So we need to understand that the curriculum requires to be changed. The expectations requires to be changed. And what the university is offering the students also requires to be changed. Just like how my friend Mark said that the universities need to recognize this, and how Clement said that they need to provide services to students. And what my university is also doing incredible job here, OP Jindal University, they partnered with Your Dost, which is an online 24/7 counseling services where students can log in anytime and they will have an access to a counselor. And I think something like that can be adopted in the long run. However, before that, as Mark said, you need to recognize that it is a problem, and you need to change your expectations from your students. You need to understand that things are different now.
Thank you for that. How important it is for universities to adjust expectations of students right now. I think that's a really, really important insight. I want to just highlight a really interesting and challenging question to the panelists. So we've said that we must listen to the students, but how do we rely on the students? As you know, they have less experience in life comparatively. So please elaborate on how we might listen to people with less experience. That is the question from the audience. Who'd like to take that one first?
If anyone wants to jump in after me, because I feel like I may have mentioned it, so I feel like so the thought process that came to my mind is that, so I have the honor and privilege of studying medicine, and one thing that happens as you go up in the years, you are looked upon as having more knowledge as the previous year, which makes a lot of sense. But oftentimes you could find yourself as a sixth year being taught something that a second year knows. So you may be in this position of, okay, I feel my ego's been bruised because I should know this knowledge, but they've just learned it. So instead of sort of taking it as, he has a potentially, if I may use the terminology, he has a less experienced individual than I am, to look at them and say, okay, I can be a learning partner with you. I can understand you, and I can learn from you, and you can learn from me. So I think in senses of, when it comes to a matter of students who are less experienced, they're coming from a different perspective, and they're coming from a diverse background. So they may have less experience, but they do have something to add. And I think when it comes to the matter of experience, it's about taking that from your perspective and being like, I have experience in this, I know how to do it a certain way, but wait a minute, you said that in-person lectures are so much better, or you said I'd rather stay at home in my pajamas on a computer. What makes you say that? In my experience, it may not work, but to have that conversation would allow you to progress, to say, I may be more experienced, but I do believe what you have to offer is important, and I'll take it and utilize my experience to shift it in a direction that can create that change. But brilliant question.
If I can go on next. I'll just say two important things in life are learning and unlearning. Unlearning is important because it allows you to have a fresh perspective at things. And so always look at glass half full and not half empty. Students young have new thoughts, and we are here to collaborate with people who have experience to bring in fresh perspective to problems, and to make sure that this learning and unlearning process is done at the both ends.
Thank you, Mohak. Would anybody else like to jump in on that one?
I'd just like to jump in and say, when we're learning as people, we shouldn't come from a position of power, because then we're not learning from the experience that we have. And even the way that question was phrased is that just because I have more experience, I have more power, and then it creates a hierarchy. And once there's hierarchy, it's not a safe environment for learning. So even though there's experience, it needs to be reflected experience. Because although you can go through something, until you sit down and recognize that, okay, wait, what has happened? How do I learn from this? How can I, be better the next time it happens? it's just experience. It's not powerful enough for it to be reflected experience, which is more sustainable. So I think even though we don't have the experience as young people, we have a lot of ideas to offer. And it's by taking older people or older people's reflected experience with our ideas and then amalgamating those to come up with something that's powerful.
And Muchadi, I just want to add a comment in the chat from Nadira Rahim from Malaysia, who says, actually, the model of professors with all of the information and knowledge, imparting that wisdom to students is itself an outdated model. And that there needs to be, because students can have access to so much information and knowledge on their own, just at the click of the button, the whole model of, sort of hierarchical teaching model, what you sort of the banking model, as some have called it, of depositing information into an empty vessel, just doesn't fit anymore in the world of students of today. Okay, I think we have just a little bit, about 5 minutes left. And so go ahead, Oye.
That is true. The young have more knowledge than the youth. But I'm looking at, I think, from the perspective of the choice of learning. We talk about, we learn more from the environment that we're in. Basically, what I'm saying or what I mean here is that possibly the environment that you grew in and the environment that maybe the young are growing in, they are totally different. So your experience may not necessarily apply to their experience. Like, for example, maybe which movies did you watch when you were a kid compared to these youth who watch maybe an advanced level of technology thing? Look at maybe what would they, before technology came up, how did it, during your age, how was the level of technology? Were you able to download maybe a video online and watch? Were you able maybe to send money or transfer money to someone, either illegal or illegal? But today, now with the technology, of course, with a new environment, with the experience they have, I think it's so different from what the religion have. As much as they study through research and such, but I would really want to say that even the youth have their own experience that maybe the others couldn't be had. Thank you.
And so it was a little bit difficult to hear you, Oye, but I think the idea of how much technology has equalized the playing field and given student voice, I think is an important insight. So we cannot leave this next generation leaders panel without the call to action, because of course that is what next generation leaders do more than anything, is they demand and spur us to action. So I'll turn it back over to you guys.
Thank you, Dana, for the wonderful moderation. And yes, we cannot end this session without a call to action. And our first call to action is we would like to continue with our conversations. I believe we have made incredible progress from March 2020 to September, and we would love to continue with these conversations. Would love to be represented at the World Higher Education Conference happening in Madrid, happening in Barcelona next year, or the Expo, the Royal Education Global Education Summit happening in Dubai at the Expo 2020. These are opportunities for us to be represented as students and also contribute towards global education. I'd call on Mark to take the next point.
Thank you so much, Clement. I believe it's our aspiration to continue to bridge the gap created by the digital divide by increasing digital literacy through the identification of one community at a time and working with them to determine their needs and slowly build initiatives so that day by day we can break the divide one community at a time. I now turn to Clary.
Thank you so much, Mark. I think it goes without saying from our discussion today that there is a dire need to change our curriculum. But some key points that need to involve this change is that we need to create holistic students that are equipped with diverse knowledge and diverse skill sets. We need to be cultivating critical thinkers, because critical thinkers are irreplaceable in a world where we're living with technology. We need to generate lifelong learners. And most importantly, we need to integrate technology and not fight it. Thank you so much.
Before ending, I'll just say a few words. March 2021, the journey began when the Telrai Network identified and selected all of us to be part of this wonderful program, where we learned and unlearned so much about different cultures, different societies, and how each society responds to social problems differently. I, on the behalf of my cohort, would like to thank the Telrai Network and the MasterCard Foundation for giving us this opportunity where we could meet other leaders, discuss and debate ideas, and reach to these calls for actions. Special mention to Professor Lolene and Christina for their regular support. They made sure we had all the resources, equipment for this journey, and we were provided with guidance by a wonderful team of Panhari, where Phil and Rivimbo mentored us at all levels. I am thankful for Dana Cunningham, Dean ma'am, for joining us today and moderating so beautifully this session. We expected this session to be 8 on 10, but you made it 11 on 10, ma'am. Thank you so much for gracing us with your presence. We all are personally in debt of all of you all for introducing us to new friends and for this wonderful journey. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Dana, if I can kindly just jump in. Sorry, I wanted to give special mention to Samuel, Ursula, and Engel. They were present in a lot of the meetings, but connectivity issues were a challenge, but I didn't want their efforts to be unnoticed. So I would like to just give special credit to them, but again, to the group. So I will not take away what Muhamad said. So thank you so much, everyone, and looking forward to continuing the journey.